The Education and Policy for the Attorney General's Office, and with me is Michele Robinson,
the state's Chief Information Security Officer. So I'm with the California Office of Information Security and Department of Technology.
And we're here to talk about what I'm sure is everybody's favorite subject, data breaches. So, it's been 10 years since California's landmark breach notice law was passed, or took effect in 2003, and I certainly feel a bit like Henry V right now, urging on the English troops. I am urging you, dear friends, once more. I'm sure you've been fighting this fight for 10 years yourselves. If not that long, you probably have 10 more years of it in the future. And we want to help you in your ongoing battle by giving you some of the benefit of the lessons that we have learned in the war to date. So as I'm sure you are aware, that the breach notification law exists in two parallel versions. One that applies to any person or business doing business in California that collects personally identifiable information on California residents, and the other one, ditto state agencies. So that's the basic background. And it, of course, requires that we notify individuals when their personally identifiable information, as defined, is acquired or reasonably believed to have been acquired by an unauthorized person. So that's kind of the bottom line on the law. It also has been another provision in it has been in effect for a few years, and that is that if the breach involved more than 500 individuals' information, then the breached entities also have to report to the Attorney General and provide a copy of their notice. And the statute applies to unencrypted, computerized data. Now, I have always been of the personal, not official, opinion that a piece of paper with PII on it that was spit out by a computer might be considered computerized. But in general, this is understood to mean digital, electronic, and unencrypted. Okay.
And so our office is responsible for directing state agencies through policy standards and procedures for state government within the executive branch. So our policies say that regardless of the law saying it's only unencrypted or electronic media, our policies say if those same notice triggering data elements are involved, they present the same level of harm to the individual potentially, so we're going to notify them as well.
Whether it's paper or...
Right, so regardless of medium, our state policies require a notification. And that requirement would trickle down to our local government partners or people that we have information sharing agreements with. That should be covered in those agreements with those system interconnections and data exchange agreements. So.
A data breach opens a window onto an organization's policies and practices regarding privacy and security, how they handle personal information, what their governance structure is like, what their technology protections are like. And both Michele and I, our organizations, look through that window and look to see what's going on and see, are there lessons to be learned that can be more generally applied. And when we looked through the window at the Attorney General's office in 2012, we wrote a story about what we saw. And if you haven't seen this, it is available on our website. The URL is at the end of this presentation. But I'm going to present you some highlights of it right now anyway. So the first thing...
Let me do this for you.
Yeah, there, I can do that one.
I'll do it. Just tell me when.
Thank you. The first thing we do when we look through the window is we let you look at the breach notices as well. So as the breach notices come into the Attorney General's office, we post them on the website. And there they all are. If you click on one of those links, you'll get down to the actual notice that went out.
And so this is for those that a single incident that involves making notification to 500 or more individuals.
Right.
So it wouldn't be the universe that we see.
Right. It's a more limited universe in that it's only the somewhat larger breaches. On the other hand, it's private sector as well. So when we looked through this window, we wanted to have a way to draw our lessons and a way to analyze what was going on. And we used this taxonomy that a couple of academics developed and published in 2008, and the citation is on the slide. You'll be able to get it. And they divided, like Gall, into 3 parts. They divided all data loss incidents, all data breaches, into 3 types. 3 types of failure. What is the failure that led to the breach? And I'm not using failure in the sense of vulnerability as opposed to a threat. It means both. Failure. So the primary categories are physical failures, logical failures, and procedural failures. So what do they mean? A physical failure is when control over a physical thing has been lost. So this is stolen laptops, stolen thumb drives, things lost in the mail, documents lost in the mail. So it's documents, media, hardware that's lost or stolen. You've actually lost control of the thing, and it has data on it. The logical type is where you haven't lost control of the server, but somebody's gotten into it. So this is hackings, intrusions, but you haven't lost control of the device. And there are 2 types. When it's an insider, which includes not just employees, but vendors, customers, and then outsiders. And then the third category is procedural. And these are all insiders. And this is where you may have, where somebody did not follow your policy, or you didn't have good policy perhaps, but where an employee accidentally, sent the whole list of everything with the social security numbers by email to the wrong person, or somebody posted something on the website thinking because of the way he put it on there that it wasn't really publicly visible, but it was. So, or something was sent through the mail and the social security number was written on the mailing label, that kind of thing. Or disposal, where either electronic media or paper records are disposed of without having been wiped or shredded or whatever. So those are the types of failures.
You going?
There's the arrows. I can do it.
So just a little background about our taxonomy, how we categorize them at the state level, which might be a little different in looking at their report. So incident categories, we have information disclosure, which accounts for if it was an incident that only involved the paper document being faxed to the wrong organization or those things. So it didn't involve any other type of category. So we have, in addition to that, other categories such as loss or theft of equipment. And so the secondary category would be information disclosure in association with that loss or theft. And so you follow that. And so it could be you've had an intrusion. And so then there's an information disclosure. And so that's how we're capturing or counting that information currently. And then we also look at paper or electronic and verbal communications. So we have seen incidents where Maybe it's an employee who has access to data as a part of their legitimate job responsibilities. They have access to a system that contains maybe records of their friends or family, neighbors, and then they have maybe just they've reviewed that information, captured it, and verbally exchanged it to someone else. So there was no loss of paper in that exchange, but they have made an unauthorized disclosure of that information. So that's what we consider verbal. Okay, and then we look at the procedural failure, or inadvertent policy or procedural failures, and some of the procedural failures that Joan mentioned as the part of the root cause, right? What was the root cause of that? So just some little clarity there.
So, in looking at the 131 breaches involving at least 500 people each that were reported to the Attorney General in 2012. So if you looked at our webpage, you'd start from the bottom because that was the first year that they reported and go up to December 31st. It's those. There's 131 separate incidents. And the biggest category was logical, that is hackings. That was more than half. The next biggest was physical, lost and stolen things, 27%, and then finally procedural, sort of errors and mistakes.
So our observations, based on the reports coming to our office, the highest percentage is not this logical thing. The highest percentage is paper, non-technical type incidents, and usually the result of an inadvertent employee act. So where we have departments that deal with a lot of paper in their processing and dealing with their customers, there's handling errors, right? They maybe hand out files for review to the wrong person who's coming for their hearing, or they hand out the wrong documents when they're at the public counter, to renew their driver's license. Those just as examples. Those are the kinds of things, or facsimile errors, that kind of thing. So the second highest percentage of reports we see is device loss theft. So whether it's your cell phone, your smartphone, the mini computer in your hand, the thumb drive that has all those records on it, and laptops. And again, usually the root cause of that is an employee act. Now, depending on the circumstance, is it inadvertent or intentional employee act, right? Did they intentionally not follow the policy and leave it in the back seat of their vehicle, where it's visible as you walk by and presents that opportunity of crime? So those are the kinds of things that we're seeing at the state level in our observations.
Now there's some overlap in our universes here, in that the state agency breaches that were electronic and involved more than 500 people are included in our group. So let's look at the logical breaches. This was the biggest category. Well, most of them, as you see, 82%, were outsiders hacking in. 23 of those of the 59 outsider ones were intrusions at retail, at point of sale. Usually at the point of sale device, so we actually know what that was. And that, in fact, was, as you'll see later, that's the largest industry segment represented in this universe, is retailers. So 23 of the 59 were compromised at the merchant level. On the insider side, there were 13 incidents where there were insiders. They were employers or contractors or whatever who intentionally went into the systems and either they didn't have the authority to go in, or they took stuff out they didn't have authority to take out.
Quick question. Michele, your numbers, they don't include non-state entities, or do they?
Correct, they do not.
Okay.
So our observations with the logical, again, is a small number of reports like that. So small number, we're seeing small numbers reported as far as an actual hack into a system that compromises a lot of data or any data. And so, you know, you think in terms of, is it because these are, again, mostly, her report says mostly retail focused financial, which we're not. We have a lot of maybe online payment collection, but it's really not, that responsibility is not held at the state agency who's doing those payment transactions. We're contracting with a payment card industry provider who's got their own, you know, audit, you know, they're subject to the audit, not the state kind of thing. You know, or is it they're just not detected and or possibly underreported? So, you know, you kind of, it just begs that question in our observation, since there is such a big difference there. In cases, and another indicator that may be possibly underreported or undetected are some reports have been made by a third party. So where, you know, it was brought to our attention that there was this issue, it was a third party who had detected it and reported it versus that entity that was affected. So, you know, you don't know what you don't know, and if you're not, you know, checking logs and being diligent in monitoring network activity and have appropriate controls in place that help you to do that, it could lead to that kind of thing. So.
And then the physical breaches, which altogether accounted for 27% of the total. As you see, the majority of them were lost or stolen hardware, and this is, you know, laptops. And somewhat significantly, PCs in break-ins, often of medical offices, CPA offices, small businesses, where somebody breaks into the building and steals the PC, and there it all is. Lost or stolen media, flash drives sent through the mail, that kind of thing, or just lost. The documents are all lost or stolen, files left in the car, shipments lost in transit, that sort of thing. Packages damaged in the mail and the stuff slips out. I'm sure we've all seen those.
So our observation here, did we skip one? No?
Nope.
Okay, so again, documents, lots of paper. Our state government's still dealing with a lot of paper that results in handling errors and unauthorized information disclosures. Secondary, again, the second highest category is hardware media loss or theft. It can say, you know, a majority are encrypted. You know, they're required to be reported if they're lost or stolen, regardless of whether or not they're encrypted. But the fact that they could contain data, and there's, in addition to our policies requiring reporting, the loss theft of any state asset is a requirement of both Department of General Services from a property accounting perspective and CHP. So, you know, there's multiple entities that have responsibility for tracking loss and theft of state assets. And, but we do see that a lot of them are encrypted. In most cases where they're not encrypted, there was an assumption that it was based on the policy. So they had the policy in place, but perhaps there wasn't a validation that policy is being complied with, or a process or procedure to kind of validate that, yeah, before that laptop gets issued to that employee, it actually is getting the encryption software installed and set to go, things like that, or a reliance on an employee to follow a policy to, you know, use an encrypted thumb drive versus maybe issuing that employee an encrypted thumb drive and validating that they're using it, those types of things. So.
And the failure to encrypt and the significance of it is one of the findings in our report last year as well. So this is, we're talking about the lost and stolen stuff. While that the lost and stolen physical failures, while that represented 27% of the incidents, it represented 56% of the people affected. There's lots of data on those moving around things. So that 56% unencrypted data in transit. There is a fix for this. That includes this is a slightly different slice than just the physical loss, because it includes, in addition to lost and stolen devices, it also includes email sent outside the network unencrypted. So that's the 56% of the people affected, not of the incident. So that was pretty striking that while it was only 27% of the incidents, it was 56% of the people, and that means that 1.4 million Californians would not have been put at risk if all those entities had encrypted data in transit.
Do you have to break out for the ones that are on devices in transit, which I assume is in there, right?
Uh-huh.
Versus email or data transmission?
It's in the report.
So our observation here really is because we do see a lot of paper incidents, and the loss theft stuff is, we've seen one non-technical breach can also affect a large number of individuals. So in the case where you have the mass mailing of information, and that those labels before they're slapped on the envelope get the social security number printed on them, and it's mailed to the population that you're serving, that can affect just as many as a laptop or a thumb drive with 1 million records on it. So really, we have to keep that in mind.
And so looking at the procedural breaches, which represented 18% of the total, most of them were processing errors. This is just that sort of thing, misdirected mail, that somebody got somebody else's W-2 or whatever, or things like printing the social security number or other confidential information on the outside of the envelope, or sending emails to the wrong person, all that sort of thing. Only two of them were improper disposal in this universe. One was an unencrypted USB drive that, somehow always gets onto eBay, and a hard drive, ditto.
So we see a similar trend here. And again, largest percentages for those top two categories I mentioned earlier, and involving the procedural and processing error. About the disposal, we have seen the improper disposal cases, and not just with equipment. Paper records, so recycling bin versus a confidential destruct bin, disposing. So that's an example of maybe an inadvertent type act that resulted in that. And then we've had cases of intentional disposal of records in the paper form. So again, it's not just equipment. You got to manage everything, right? If it's on the paper, you got to manage that. Okay, so some stats with trends in data breaches. We just took a sample year. So our reporting and data intake is dynamic. So this was a pretty stable year to be able to count. But we saw a similar trend from 2008 to 2010, where approximately information security disclosures accounted for 68% of all incidents that were reported to our office.
So that's all security incidents.
Yeah, so the total universe of incidents that were reported to our office, which that year were approximately 1,600, 68% were those information disclosure.
So, Michele, so all state agencies, all ca.govs report to you when they have any kind of incident at all with one person or 10,000 people?
Not ca.gov, because a local government could be using ca.gov domain.
Okay, so the state of California?
So if they are a state entity within the executive branch that is required to report to us.
From 1 to infinity. One
Person affected.
Yes, one person affected, and paper or electronic. Yeah.
state asset, right?
Not necessarily. There are some complications with that. And again, it gets into what's the relationship with that entity to the state. So we have to understand what that is in order to determine, okay, is it a reportable? If there's a relationship with that entity and the potential that they're going to be saying, Department of Healthcare Services provides us with data, and we, had this incident with your person that resulted in the exposure of your personal information. That's something that you need to report. So if there is any connection between that entity and the state with respect to that data and the sharing of that data, then you would need to report it. Does that make sense? Does that answer the question? Okay. So of the 68%, okay, going back to 68% are information disclosure. So now we have that information disclosure pool. Of the 68, 86% were paper. Involved paper medium.
Has that gone down over time?
No.
No. I mean, that percentage.
No, that trend seems to stay pretty consistent. 8% were electronic and included facsimile errors in that count.
We actually include the fax errors
In the paper? Okay.
rather than separating out.
Yes.
Good.
And then 6% were verbal. That seems a little, it's up there with the electronic. And then 1% was both, involved both. And 88% was the result of an inadvertent employee processing error. And so in my opinion, this could be addressed through ongoing security and privacy awareness training, making sure that the individuals who are processing that paper understand there's an individual tied to it and that can be affected when there's error. So making sure that as part of your training, they understand the consequences of error and how important their work is, to the people we're serving. So yes, Sandy.
We've also noticed a lot of inadvertent emails in our department too, and it seemed to rise when we all went to a global email system, and you start to put in, my name's Samantha, you put in SA, and Samantha can put in Sarah, and everybody else is global. We're actually looking at a decision, maybe we limit that, so instead of having everyone access to the global, the default address list would just be to the department. And if they wanted this sent outside, they'd actually have to put the box to do that. And I don't know if you've seen a trend since the time when most state departments went to that global entire email system, if those inadvertent errors by staff have risen.
I don't think we've seen any kind of significant update. Again, the largest is paper, not the email issue. Although we do have reports of the email and the inadvertent website postings where they do have business processes, legitimate business processes where they're posting reports or uploading reports to their websites, their public-facing websites, and maybe the partner, so example, schools that have to provide certain reports may send the wrong report. In that process, it gets uploaded to the state's website and creates that issue. Building processes in, quality assurance processes that prevent that kind of thing is usually what ends up occurring, and maybe being proactive in that and having them up front, would be important. Okay.
So here's the breakdown of our universe of 131 in 2012. The biggest category is retail, and that's mostly point of sale terminal penetration, sometimes physical devices, sometimes hacking. And there's a lot of energy being put on that by the retail industry and the financial services industry. And as we move to chip and pin cards, that will probably lessen, driving that fraud online. So it'll be interesting to see how that goes overnight, because it won't work. Chip and pin doesn't work online. The second biggest was Willie Sutton's place, where the money is, finance and insurance, health followed by healthcare, and I was happy to see that in this scenario, government didn't loom as a major, but remember this is over 500. And in the other category, that's things like hotels, agriculture, utilities, manufacturing, transportation. No one of them had even 1%. So,
Dan?
yeah.
Do you notice any trends over by sector? It seems to be higher, other sectors that going around it?
For our data, this is year one. We are working on the next year, and so then we'll start to see that. We didn't, in this report and in this analysis, delve down into looking at the, like, by industry, by type, because the buckets there just weren't big enough to really be drawing. Some of them weren't that many. So by the second year, we've got more that we think we're going to be able to get some more lessons. When I think of the analysis that's been done from newspaper reported breaches, from all those different lists of them that are available online, what they tend to show is it's usually finance and insurance is very, very much number one.
And it's like the researchers you're referring to is like privacy
Yes,
rights.
Privacy Rights
Clearinghouse has a big list of those.
But that's based on many years of data, but less reliable data because it's newspaper reports, which are not the whole story. It's a point in time. You know, we've got a point in time, but we've also delved a little deeper and had conversations and pulled some more information that we use to look at this and analyze this data.
Okay, so our observations. Again, one incident affecting one individual is just as important as one incident affecting many, especially if you're that individual. We all have an important role and responsibility, especially in government where providing your personal information isn't really an option. You know, we don't have an option to not provide that to the Franchise Tax Board, right? So we have a really important job to do there. So again, due diligence and do care, because we do care.
I think you got a little motto in there. I found this rather disturbing. In 56% of the breaches in our set, Social Security numbers, you know, there they are. And considering that retail was the biggest industry, that hacking was the major venture, so there's a lot of retail hacking, and that's not Social Security numbers, that's payment card data. And yet, when you look at it by number of people affected, this is by number of breaches, and yet we're seeing lots and lots of Social Security numbers still. This adds up to more than 100% because some incidents involve more than one type of information. So payment cards are just the next one down. And payment card is the word there, not credit card, because sometimes we don't know whether it's credit or debit, even though the consumer impact can be rather different depending on which it is.
So similar trend for the SSN, driver's license, health and medical information. Those are kind of the four that we see often, and that kind of makes sense based on our government sectors, and not really seeing a lot of payment card or bank information, although we do see some banking stuff.
So and there are some more findings in the report as well. So based on all of our findings from 2012, here are the recommendations that we make in the report. And the first one is to encrypt data in transit. Yeah, I mean, yes, encryption isn't necessarily perfect against all adversaries, but it's certainly going to eliminate a lot of problems from a lot of adversaries. We've had for 10 years our state law, as well as all the other 45 other state laws about data breach notification. They create a safe harbor for encryption. They have a carrot, if they apply to unencrypted, and yet, it's possible that someone should be thinking about a stick. We have some specific recommendations about organizations looking at some issues to just review their security procedures, and particularly looking at training, and the same point that Michele made earlier about those procedural incidents, about the need to keep people focused on the significance of their responsibility in handling the information. Improving the readability, our law says that the notice must be in plain language. We did a sampling, it was about 70 of them, I think, using words, reading score things, so this isn't exactly ultra scientific, but it shouldn't be shocking. We found that the notices were written at an average reading grade level of 14, that is college, whereas the average reading level of Americans is more like 8th grade. So this is a type of communication, and I'm talking about the communication to the consumer, to the affected individual. This is crisis communications. Yes, it's crisis for the organization. It's also a crisis for the consumer. It's bad news. It's when you're getting some sort of shocking bad news, you need extra simple language. It's extra hard to understand. We found some odd patterns about the mitigation products that were offered, that is the identity theft services, credit monitoring, and we make some specific recommendations about that. And we also recommended, and our wish has come true, that legislation be considered to make passwords a notice triggering information. So now with the passage of SB 46, it passed and was signed. It goes into effect in January. It says that it adds a new category of personal information that triggers the requirement to notify, and it's, the existing category is name plus one or more of the following: social security number, driver's license, da-da-da-da. Now, name plus da-da, then there's another category in parallel, which is user ID, user ID plus password or security question and answer.
Right. When that legislation first came out, they had the password under name.
Yeah.
And you could get away with not
No.
Yeah.
Came out. And that permit access to an online account. And the law contains some alternate ways to make the notification for that kind of a breach, recognizing that in many cases online account companies won't have physical mailing addresses. So it allows some alternative ways to notify online to the standard way to do it for the other type. We're going to be updating our recommended practices on data breach notification document, the one that was prepared by the Office of Privacy Protection in the past. The Attorney General's Privacy Unit is going to be updating that and looking at best practice recommendations on doing a notification of a password breach. And so we're hoping to get that out early in the new year.
So we have a set of recommendations as well. So I think it's important for departments or entities to look at what are their personal identifying information collection practices. Understand where are you collecting those? Where are your collection points for that? Whether it's in a paper form or online. And really examining, is there a need for that? So the privacy notification requirement, not breach notification, but the privacy notification and notice on collection requirement says you need to identify if providing that piece of information is mandatory or optional, right? And spells out some other things you need to include in that collection point notice. So really look at that. I hear sometimes that, well, we're going to, we may need it later and we're going to, so we're going to collect it. And so you really need to work with the business to understand, okay, that puts us at additional risk. If we really don't need that, that is an additional risk that we're introducing to our organization. So that would be one thing. And so ensure that proper notice is made on collection. If you're driving that compliance requirement, that's going to help identify the need for it, right? Is it voluntary or mandatory, right? Conduct privacy impact assessments in your organizations for new and modified information systems, which are going to have PII, and evaluate your encryption needs. Look at alternatives for data field level encryption versus the entire database, because we understand that there's some overhead and issues with that, but the technology is available for masking, for data field level encryption that would be less disruptive to your operations. So look at those solutions now today and consider those and really evaluate that. Ensure continuous training, and that would be number one on the list. That is just absolutely important and basic to your operations, and then implement those quality control processes and procedures. Like I said, with the example of uploading documents to your public-facing website, make sure that if we're getting those from a third party, make sure that we have some QC in the middle that is making sure that it doesn't have personal information that we're contributing to that event, if you will. Okay, that's it. Let's see what else.
And then here's where you can find the data breach report, and before too long, the new one. And you can also find the list of data breaches there. So, do you have any questions?
It's really good that SB 46 got passed. Do you see any support in the future for extending breach requirements to the county and cities?
Yes, AB 1149 extended it to local government. So local government starting in, I'm not sure if it's 2014 or 2015. There may be a delayed start date.
What was the number?
AB 1149. They will be subject, yes, it was signed, they will be subject to the data breach requirement, notification requirement. I need to look at it again, but
Well, I think
if it's over 500, I assume so.
Yeah, if it's over 500, they would have to report it then to the Office of the Attorney General. They wouldn't have to report it to us. If they had a data exchange agreement with you or system interconnection agreement with you, then they would have to be reporting it to you, right, by virtue of that agreement. And so.
But if it's less than 500, are they still going to be required to send out notices?
Oh, yes.
Oh,
yes,
yeah,
yes. The
yeah.
500 threshold is just for notifying the Attorney General. The breach notification law, one person, that's a breach.
So we don't know about it, but they're still required to do it.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
I just had a question about, there was, at the beginning of the discussion, there was some discussion about the Information Practices Act being limited to computerized data, but the state ISO also looked at paper data. And I just wanted, I know that's the policy, and I was just wanting to make sure I knew where to find it. Is that part of the state administrative manual, or is there another place where I can find it?
Yes, State Administrative Manual, and it's Chapter 5300. And the policy as updated recently may actually point you to a procedural document that contains that level of detail. Okay. And if you need assistance, just give us a call and we'll help navigate you to it.
And the computerized data language is not, it's in the Information Practices Act state agency version, but it's also in the private sector version. Okay, thank you very much.